After my husband passed, I never told my daughter about the gold bars in my attic. Margaret Lane, widow and mother for 42 years, kept her smile polite over Sunday tea. Claire, the daughter whose college I once paid for in full, chatted about downsizing my home as if it were already hers. By morning, the attic would be locked, insured, and appraised under my own name. No shared access, no surprises. I'd been both wife and mother. Now I was the guardian of my own fortune. And when the estate papers were read, Claire finally learned what I'd kept above the rafters. I'm curious, where in the world are you joining us from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed for all the latest updates. I never thought I'd be the one to find it. But there it was, hidden under the floorboards, gleaming, waiting to change everything. The attic was warmer than Caroline expected, the air heavy with the smell of old wood and insulation. She'd come looking for the Thanksgiving decorations. Boxes she knew were shoved somewhere in the back. The floor groaned softly as she ducked under a low beam. A cobweb caught in her hair, making her wince. Her hand brushed past brittle Christmas garland and stacks of yellowed magazines before touching something harder. A wooden crate, narrow, long, the surface dulled with dust. It didn't belong. Caroline crouched, tracing the edges. A small brass latch sat at the front, tarnished but unbroken. She hesitated, then flipped it open. Inside, wrapped in coarse burlap, was a smaller, heavier bundle. The fabric rasped against her palms as she unrolled it. Gold, thick bars, each the size of a paperback, gleamed dully in the dim light. An unfamiliar engraving marked the surface. A crest, or perhaps two letters intertwined in an ornate design. Not a mint stamp, not anything she'd ever seen before. She picked one up, the weight pulled at her wrist. For a moment she just knelt there, listening to the silence as if the house itself were holding still. Michael, it had been 6 years since her husband died. In all that time she'd known him as practical, almost frugal. They'd scraped by for decades. Mortgage, car repairs, those long months after the factory closed. Never had she imagined something like this hidden just overhead. The warmth of the attic pressed against her skin. She set the bar back, her fingers trembling slightly. The sensible thing would be to call someone, bank, police, maybe even an appraiser. But another thought rose, sharp and quiet. Close the lid. Tell no one, especially Jenny. Her daughter's image filled her mind. 35, ambitious, always chasing the next opportunity. Jenny could be relentless. If she knew about this, she'd insist on managing it, investing it, turning it into something that would no longer be Caroline's to control. She lifted another bar, tilting it in the light. The engraving caught the glow. Strange and elegant. 12 bars in total. Enough, Caroline suspected, to alter a life completely. Enough to alter theirs in ways she might not survive. The ticking of the hall clock downstairs reached her faintly. Jenny was away for the weekend at a real estate seminar. 2 days of quiet, 2 days to think. But the thought of anyone else touching these bars unsettled her. She wrapped them again in burlap, the coarse weave scratching her hands, and nestled them back into the crate. Closing the latch felt like sealing in something dangerous. She slid the crate behind the old newspapers, draping the brittle garland over it. Then she stood, brushing dust from her jeans, her heart still unsteady. At the top of the attic stairs, she paused. From here, the shadows hid the corner entirely, as though nothing unusual had been there at all. But Caroline could still see it in her mind, rows of gold, the engraving, the weight. As she stepped down into the hallway, the house seemed unchanged. The faint smell of coffee from the morning still lingered, yet she felt as though she'd crossed some invisible line. This wasn't just a secret, it was a choice, one that would shape everything that came after. Her fingers tightened on the railing, her gaze drifting toward the quiet kitchen below. What would she do if she knew? Caroline closed the attic door gently, the image of the gold burning in her mind, its silent weight already tugging at the calm life she thought she'd built. The weight of those gold bars felt like a secret I couldn't carry alone. The gold hadn't moved from the attic, but in Caroline's mind, it had followed her into every room. She could feel it when she poured her morning coffee, when she folded towels, when she stood at the kitchen sink. It was as if the house now had a second heartbeat, hers and the one pulsing from above the ceiling. By Sunday afternoon, the familiar crunch of tires on gravel told her Jenny was home. Caroline smoothed her sweater and opened the door before her daughter could knock. "Hey, Mom," Jenny said, cheeks flushed from the cold, hair falling in loose waves. She stepped inside, the scent of her citrus shampoo cutting through the house's stillness. That seminar was exhausting, but so worth it. Caroline listened as Jenny unpacked her weekend market forecasts, renovation tips, networking contacts, her voice bright and eager. Caroline nodded at the right moments, but her thoughts drifted, circling the attic. That night, over roast chicken and rosemary potatoes, Jenny shifted the conversation. "I've been thinking, we should go over your finances sometime." Caroline's fork hovered mid-air. "Why?" Jenny shrugged. "Just smart to plan. You've got equity in the house, your pension. We could do something with it, make it work for us." Caroline set her fork down. "Everything's fine as it is." Jenny leaned forward. "I'm serious. Real estate's where the money is. I've been looking at a couple of properties we could flip. You put in a little, we double it in a year." The word "we" lodged in Caroline's mind like a burr. "I'm not interested." Jenny's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in calculation. "Not interested, or not telling me something." Caroline kept her tone even. "Just not interested." Jenny let it drop, but the air between them cooled. Later, when the house was quiet, Caroline stood in the kitchen steeping tea. She stared at the dark swirl in the mug, thinking of the bars, their strange engraving, their impossible weight. She had told herself the silence was protection. But protection for whom? The next morning, Caroline almost said something. Jenny was leaning against the counter, scrolling on her phone, rattling off another idea about a fixer-upper on Maple Street. Her enthusiasm was sharp. It was easy to imagine her seeing the gold not as history or legacy, but as fuel. Caroline pictured it, the attic open, Jenny's hands on the crate, her mind already turning over interest rates and renovation budgets. The thought made Caroline's pulse climb. She washed her hands at the sink, the water running hotter than necessary. "Sounds like a lot of work," she said. "It could be our work," Jenny replied, smiling. Caroline returned the smile, but it felt like a When Jenny left to meet a friend, Caroline stayed at the window until the sound of the car faded. Then her gaze slid down the hallway toward the attic door. The silence up there was deceptive. She knew the crate was exactly where she'd left it, tucked behind a dusty garland and old news. Yet she could almost hear the bars clinking faintly in the dark. She pressed her palms to the cool glass of the window. Every day she kept them hidden. The secret grew heavier. It wasn't just gold anymore, it was a decision, a line she had chosen to hold. She told herself again, safer if no one knows. But another voice rose quietly in her mind, one she couldn't ignore. "How long before it consumes you?" Caroline closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. The weight in the attic wasn't going anywhere, and neither was the truth. She turned from the window, her eyes drawn once more to the attic door. "How much of this secret can I carry before it eats me alive?" Just when I thought I could forget about it, something unexpected made me reconsider everything. For a few weeks, Caroline convinced herself the gold had faded into the background of her life. It stayed upstairs, untouched, hidden beneath brittle garland and old papers. She moved through her days almost normally, running errands, tending the garden, having tea with but the comfort was fragile. Jenny had begun circling her in conversation, probing in small ways that didn't feel small at all. One afternoon, while they were sorting laundry in the living room, Jenny asked, "Have you updated your will recently?" Caroline's hands froze on a folded towel. "It's fine," she said quickly. Jenny tilted her head. "I just think transparency's important, for everyone's sake." The word transparency made Caroline's jaw tighten. "There's nothing to worry about." Jenny's tone stayed pleasant, but her eyes lingered. "We could look things over together sometime." Caroline nodded vaguely, hoping the conversation would dissolve, but instead it planted itself like a weed. By the end of the week, Caroline noticed herself snapping at small things, Jenny leaving a cabinet open, her phone buzzing on the counter. The tension was building, and Caroline could feel the secret pressing against her composure. One rainy evening they sat in the kitchen while the storm tapped at the windows. Jenny stirred sugar into her tea, then leaned forward. "You know this house has good bones. If we refinanced, we could update it. Add a sunroom, maybe redo the kitchen." Caroline felt her spine stiffen. "It's fine the way it is." Jenny smiled faintly, as if indulging a stubborn child. "Just think about it. With the equity you have, the bank would say yes in a heartbeat." Caroline's pulse quickened. "I'm not interested in taking on debt. You wouldn't have to." Jenny countered. "I could handle the paperwork. You just need to co-sign." The thought of opening her finances, of letting Jenny see even a fraction of the truth, made Caroline's stomach turn. "It's not the right time," she said. Jenny didn't back down. "When is the right time, Mom? You're sitting on potential here." Caroline's voice cooled. "Potential isn't everything." The silence that followed was thick enough to hear the rain hit the glass. Jenny finally pushed back from the table. "I just want us to make smart moves before it's too late." Caroline didn't answer. 2 days later, Jenny brought it up again, this time with numbers. "If you co-sign, we can get a low interest rate. It's simple. The loan covers renovations. We increase the value, sell in a few years, win-win." Caroline looked at her daughter, the calculation clear in her eyes. She heard herself agreeing, but the word felt foreign. "Fine." The relief on Jenny's face was immediate. "You won't regret this." Caroline wasn't so sure. That night, after Jenny had gone to bed, Caroline wandered into the hallway and stared at the attic door. She pictured the crate burlap-wrapped gold, the engraving catching the dim light. She thought of appraisers, bank vaults, the kind of money that could erase any need for loans. But then she saw Jenny's hands on the bars, her mind racing ahead, her ambition swallowing the secret hole. Caroline pressed her forehead to the cool wood of the attic door. Selling even one bar could cover the renovations without the bank, without paperwork that risked exposing everything. But taking one meant breaking the seal she'd held for weeks, and once broken, could she really stop? She returned to the kitchen, made herself tea, and sat in the dark. The rain had stopped, but her thoughts hadn't. She had agreed to the loan, but it was only a matter of time before Jenny asked for more. More access, more say, more control. And once that happened, the attic wouldn't just be a hiding place. It would be a temptation neither of them could resist. Caroline cradled the mug in her hands, the steam warming her face. Upstairs, the gold sat in silence, its weight measured not just in ounces, but in choices she couldn't unmake. She sipped, the tea bitter. Caroline imagined pulling the crate into the light, selling the bars, and ending the secrecy. But the vision twisted. Jenny's face, the questions, the loss of control. She set the mug down, heart pounding. If she touched the gold, she might lose far more than she gained. I couldn't say no to her again, but I wasn't about to risk losing everything. Jenny leaned on the kitchen counter, arms crossed. "Have you signed the loan papers yet?" Caroline set her mug down. "Not yet. You said you would. The contractor's waiting. We need your signature by Friday." Caroline forced a smile. "I'll take care of." She had agreed, but the decision lodged in her chest like a stone. Signing meant peeling back the privacy she'd guarded for years, privacy that kept the attic untouched. That afternoon, she hauled a tin box of financial papers from the closet. Dust clung to her fingers as she sifted through mortgage statements, tax records, faded bank slips. Near the bottom lay a bundle of envelopes tied with twine, Michael's handwriting. She carried them to the table, untied the knot, and began to read. Most were mundane. Reminders to pay the water bill, notes about oil changes. Then one stopped her cold. "Caroline, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone." Her breath caught. "I've set aside something for you, for us. Not in a bank. Not on paper. It's meant to keep you safe, no matter what. Don't speak of it. Not to friends. Not to Jenny. People change when money's involved. Use it only when there's no other way." Caroline lowered the letter, pulse thudding. He had known the gold wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, a silent contingency plan, with rules she now felt bound to obey. That evening, Jenny breezed in, cheeks pink from the cold. "We should talk about ownership after renovations," she said, flipping through her phone. If the house is in both our names, we can leverage it for more investments. Caroline's stomach clenched. Why would we do that? Because we're building something together. If I'm on the title, I can negotiate bigger deals. The words scraped at her nerves. I'll think about it, Caroline said, keeping her tone neutral. Jenny smiled faintly. Don't overcomplicate it. It's smart business. Later, Caroline spread the letters across her bed. Michael's warning echoed. People change when money's involved. She imagined telling Jenny, but the scene darkened quickly. Her daughter's sharp ambition turning the gold into capital, not legacy. The next morning, she called the bank. The loan officer confirmed Jenny's name would appear on all disclosures. Caroline hung up, heart hammering. She considered selling just one bar quietly, without records. It would cover the renovations in cash. No loans, no paperwork. But taking one meant breaking the seal she'd guarded since the day she found it. And once she did, could she stop? That night, she climbed the attic stairs halfway. The air smelled of dust and dry wood. She pictured the crate in its corner, burlap folded around each bar, the engraving glinting in faint light. Her fingers tightened on the banister. Lifting that lid would be a point of no return. She turned back, the attic staying in shadow. The following day, Jenny arrived with printed estimates. We can get a lower rate if we lock in this month, she said, sliding the papers across the table. I'll handle the calls, just sign here. Caroline picked up the pen, then set it down. I want to review everything first. Jenny frowned. We don't have time for second guessing. This is the best option. Caroline didn't reply, but the walls seemed closer. Every step toward the loan felt like a step toward losing the secret. That evening, she returned to the final page of Michael's letter. Use it only when there's no other way, she whispered. What if this is that moment? The attic loomed above her, silent yet heavy. She imagined the gold in her hands, solid, undeniable, dangerous. The choice was narrowing, and soon she'd have to step one way or the other. Caroline folded the letter with shaking hands. What if I've made a mistake keeping it from her? The closer Jenny got to the truth, the more I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of my secret. Jenny's visits became more frequent, and her conversations more poignant. She no longer tiptoed around the subject of money. She marched right up to it. One afternoon, she arrived with her laptop already open. I've been thinking, she began, clicking through a spreadsheet. We should form an LLC, family-owned, real estate, maybe even short-term rent. It would give us tax benefits. Caroline sat across from her, arms folded. Why would I need a company? Because it's smarter to build something together, Jenny replied without looking up. You've got resources, I've got drive. It's a perfect match. Resource. The word felt like a hook dragging against her ribs. Caroline offered a tight smile. I'll think about it. But she didn't think about it. She avoided it entirely. Over the next week, she began dodging Jenny's calls, letting them go to voicemail with vague promises to ring back. When Jenny stopped by unannounced, Caroline kept their conversations shallow: gardening, recipes, weather, anything but money. It didn't work. One evening, Jenny lingered in the doorway of the kitchen as Caroline chopped vegetables. I'm serious about this, she said. A business would mean we're planning for the future, not just waiting for it to happen. All we'd need is some startup cash, a loan from you, just to get rolling. Caroline kept her eyes on the cutting board. What's the rush? Because opportunities don't wait. Jenny stepped closer, her voice lowering. And you've got the means to make this happen. Why not invest in me? The knife stilled in Caroline's hand. Invest in me. The words should have sounded hopeful. Instead, they felt like a demand. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Michael's letter replayed in her mind. Don't speak of it. People change when money's involved. Jenny's ambition was sharp, and Caroline couldn't ignore the way it gleamed when she talked about profit margins and market flips. She began to imagine what Jenny would do if she found the gold. The vision was never gentle. Fast sales, risky investments, the fortune splintering into ventures Caroline couldn't control. The following weekend, Jenny arrived again, this time with a tone edged in frustration. You've been shutting me out. Every time I bring up money, you change the subject. What are you so afraid of? Caroline bristled. I'm not afraid. I just don't want to mix family and business. Jenny's eyes narrowed. Then what are you hiding? The question lingered long after Jenny left, echoing in the quiet rooms. That night, Caroline climbed the attic stairs, the wood cool under her bare feet. She pushed open the hatch, the smell of dust wrapping around her. The corner was exactly as she'd left it. Brittle garland, stacks of newspapers, and beneath them, the crate. She crouched, brushing her fingers over the burlap. It was still there. The gold's weight was invisible yet undeniable, like a silent presence pressing against her chest. She unwrapped one bar, letting the dim light catch the engraving. The metal was cold in her palm, heavier than she remembered. She tried to imagine telling Jenny about it. Her daughter's eyes widening, questions pouring out, plans forming before the words even finished leaving her mouth. Caroline wrapped it again and tucked it back into place. On her way down, she paused at the top step, looking into the shadows. For weeks she'd told herself she could manage the secret, keep it locked away. But the more Jenny pushed, the more Caroline felt the walls closing in. In the kitchen, she poured herself a glass of water, staring at the ripples on the surface. The question wasn't if Jenny would find out, it was when, and when she did, there would be no putting the gold back in the dark. Her heart tightened as another thought crept in. What if Jenny had already begun to suspect more than she let on? Caroline set the glass down, the sound sharp in the quiet room. She realized with a jolt that she might have underestimated her daughter's determination, and the truth could be closer to the surface than she dared believe. The day she found out, I knew my life would never be the same again. It began with footsteps in the hallway, too light to be hurried, too deliberate to be casual. Caroline was in the kitchen, rinsing coffee cups when the faint groan of the attic ladder reached her ears. Her stomach dropped. She dried her hands on a dish towel and moved toward the sound. Her voice caught somewhere between calm and alarm. "Jenny, what are you doing up there?" No answer. Just the muted shuffle of movement above. By the time Caroline reached the base of the attic stairs, Jenny was already descending. In her arms, small, heavy and wrapped in burlap, was the crate. Jenny's face was pale but her eyes blazed. "What is this?" Caroline's throat tightened. "Put it down." Jenny set it on the floor, pulled back the burlap, and the gold caught the light. 12 bars lined like soldiers, their engravings glinting. "You've been hiding this? For how long?" "It's not what you think," Caroline said, hearing the tremor in her own voice. Jenny's laugh was sharp, disbelieving. "Not what I think. You've got a fortune sitting in the attic and you've been pretending we're scraping by." Caroline reached for the crate, but Jenny stepped between them. "I kept it hidden to protect us," Caroline said, each word deliberate. "Your father wanted it that way. Protect us?" Jenny's voice rose. "From what? From me? That's not..." Jenny cut her off. "We could have built something together. We could have invested, expanded. Instead, you've been hoarding it like some dragon in her cave." The words landed hard, but Caroline forced herself to stand still. "You don't understand what this means. What it could do to us if people knew. What it could do to us." Jenny shook her head. "What it could do for us, Mom. There's a Caroline tried to steady the conversation, but her daughter's eyes were locked on the gold, the reflection flickering in her gaze. "It's not about greed," Jenny said. "It's about opportunity. Opportunities come with risks." Caroline replied, "Some you can't undo." Jenny's jaw set. "So you decide for both of us? Without even telling me it exists?" The air between them grew taut. Caroline could feel the moment slipping away, the conversation hardening into something irreversible. Jenny's voice was cold now. "If you won't do the right thing, I'll make you." Caroline's pulse hammered. "What's that supposed to mean?" Jenny stepped back, pulling her phone from her pocket. "I'm calling a lawyer." Caroline's breath caught. "Jenny?" "No," Jenny said, her tone cutting. "I need to know if you even had the legal right to keep this from me. If Dad left this to the family, your father left it to me." Caroline snapped before she could stop herself. The silence that followed was heavier than the gold. Jenny's eyes narrowed, calculating. "We'll see what the law says." She tapped at her phone, scrolling for a number. "Jenny, please, this isn't the way." Jenny didn't look up. You made your choice when you decided to hide it. Now I'm making mine. Caroline felt a wave of nausea. The attic had always been her sanctuary, the golden unspoken promise between her and Michael. Now in the space of minutes, it had turned into a weapon in her daughter's hands. Jenny ended her search on the phone and glanced up, her voice lower but more dangerous for it. If you don't give me my share, I'll make sure this all goes public. Every last bar. Every secret. You think you're protecting us. Wait until the world knows what you've been hiding. The gold between them glinted in the light, silent and damning. Caroline stood frozen, the weight of Jenny's threat settling like iron in her chest, realizing that the secret she'd guarded so fiercely might now be the very thing that destroys her. I never thought I'd be fighting my own daughter over what my husband left behind. The letter from Jenny's lawyer arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped through the mail slot like any other piece of post. Caroline recognized the name embossed on the envelope before she even opened it. Inside, the words were clinical, stripped of affection. My client, Jennifer Hale, asserts her legal claim to a portion of the gold assets currently in your possession. Her hands shook as she read. The language was unmistakable. Jenny wasn't asking anymore. She was demanding. By Thursday, Caroline was sitting across from her own attorney, Martin Wade, a lean man with sharp features and a voice that never seemed to rise. He leafed through the letter without expression. She's contesting ownership, he said finally. Claims it's part of your late husband's estate, therefore divisible among heirs. It's not, Caroline said. It was Michael's gift to me. Martin looked up. Do you have proof of that? Caroline thought of the letter from Michael upstairs, the one written in his slanted hand. Yes, but it's personal. I don't want it dragged through court. That might not be your choice, Martin replied. The first court date was set within weeks. Jenny arrived flanked by a suited man in his 40s. Her posture stiff, her expression unreadable. Caroline's heart clenched at the sight of her, so familiar yet suddenly a stranger. When Jenny's lawyer spoke, his words were sharp enough to cut the air. My client believes these assets were concealed, deliberately kept from her in violation of inheritance law. We will present evidence of intentional deceit. Caroline's jaw tightened. That's not true, she whispered to Martin, though her voice was lost in the shuffle of papers. Martin's turn came. The gold in question is not a marital asset. It was a private bequest from the late Michael Hale to his wife. The law is clear. Such a gift remains the sole property of the recipient. Jenny glanced across the table, her eyes like glass. You hid it from me for years. Caroline met her stare. I followed your father's wish. The depositions were grueling. Jenny's lawyer pressed about dates, about why Caroline never declared the gold. She countered each question, but with every answer the air seemed to thicken. Max sat in on one of the meetings, leaning back in his chair, arms folded. He had stayed quiet through most of it, eyes flicking between mother and sister. When the session broke, Caroline caught him alone in the hallway. Whose side are you on? She asked. He hesitated. I just want it settled, Mom. That's not an answer. Max's gaze dropped to the floor. Maybe it's not that simple. The hearing stretched on. Jenny accused her of moving the gold to avoid legal seizure, a fabrication that made Caroline's pulse spike. I haven't touched it, she told Martin afterward. It's still in the attic. Then we need to prove that, Martin said. Jenny's lawyer began pushing for a public trial. Transparency, he called it. Caroline heard something else. Exposure. The thought of the gold's existence becoming common knowledge sent a cold ripple through her. Once public, there'd be no hiding it from neighbors, from the government, from anyone. At the next strategy meeting, Martin laid out her options. We can fight this, but the longer it goes on, the more attention it will draw. Or we settle privately. Caroline stared at the table, tracing the grain of the wood with her fingertip. Settlement would mean giving Jenny part of the gold, breaking Michael's trust. Fighting could mean losing everything anyway. Outside the courthouse one afternoon, the winter wind cut through her. Jenny passed by without meeting her eyes, her lawyer at her side. Max lingered near the steps, his expression unreadable. She realized then how far they'd drifted, not just from peace, but from the possibility of. That night, in her kitchen, she pulled Michael's letter from the drawer and read it again. Don't speak of it. Not to friends. Not to Jenny. Use it only when there's no other way. Maybe she'd already crossed that line. Caroline set the letter down, her reflection trembling in the dark window. The fight was spinning beyond her control, and for the first time she wondered if telling Jenny the truth from the start might have been the only way to save them. Every day felt like another round in a battle that wasn't just about gold, but love, trust, and betrayal. By early March, the case had become more than a family dispute. It was a story whispered in the grocery store aisle, mentioned in low voices at the post office. Caroline caught the sideways glances, the abrupt silences, when she walked into a room. She didn't know if it was gossip or pity that followed her, and she wasn't sure which would be worse. Inside the courtroom, nothing softened. Jenny sat 2 chairs away, her posture straight, her jaw tight. They spoke only through their lawyers now. Even during recess, their eyes rarely met. There was a pause. "Are you sure that's what you want?" "No," she admitted, "but I'm not sure I want to keep losing her either." That night she sat at the dining table long after dark, staring at the folded letter. The war in her mind circled endlessly. Love versus loyalty, truth versus protection. The fire in the hearth had burned down to embers when the knock came at the door. It wasn't Jenny, it wasn't Ruth. It was a man Caroline didn't recognize, mid-50s, wearing a wool coat, his expression both cautious and knowing. "Mrs. Hale?" he asked. "We need to talk. It's about your husband and the gold." Caroline's fingers tightened on the edge of the door. Whatever this was, she knew instantly. It could change the fight in ways neither she nor Jenny could control. The truth was far darker than either of us had expected. The man at the door introduced himself as David Hale, Michael's cousin, though Caroline had never met him. His voice was low, steady, as if each word carried weight. "We should talk somewhere private," he said. She hesitated, but something in his expression, part warning, part urgency, made her step aside. In the kitchen, he kept his coat on, his gaze moving to the corners of the room like he was checking for shadows. "This is about the gold," he said finally. "You need to know where it came from." Caroline's pulse quickened. "Michael left it to me. That's all I need to know." David shook his head. "No, it's not, because it wasn't his to give." She gripped the edge of the counter. "What are you talking about?" He glanced toward the window, lowering his voice. "Before he died, Michael got mixed up in something bad. Smuggling mostly, not drugs. Precious metals. He moved gold for people who didn't want their names on any paperwork. That crate upstairs, it's part of what went missing before a deal was finished." Caroline stared at him, her mouth dry. "You're saying my husband stole it." "I'm saying he didn't exactly earn it legally." David's gaze locked on hers. "And if certain people find out it's here, it won't be a courtroom you're fighting in." A faint creak came from the hallway. Jenny stepped into the kitchen, her face pale. "I heard everything." Caroline turned sharply. "Jenny, so you knew?" Jenny's voice shook. "You've been fighting me over stolen gold." "I didn't know," Caroline said, the words tumbling out. "Not until now." Jenny's eyes darted to David. "And you're sure?" David nodded. "Positive. Michael was family, but I can't let you walk into this blind. If the wrong person connects you to that crate, you'll lose more than just money." Jenny backed against the doorframe, her earlier fury replaced with something colder, fear. If this is true, keeping it isn't an option. Caroline felt the floor tilt under her. "If we turn it in, there will be questions about where it came from, how long I've had it. The police will think I was part of it." David exhaled slowly. "They might, or they might just seize it and close the case. But either way, it won't be quiet." Silence stretched between them, the hum of the refrigerator loud in its stead. Jenny finally spoke. "I thought Dad was building something for us. A safety net. Not this." Caroline's throat tightened. "Whatever he did, he must have thought he was protecting us. Or himself," Jenny said, her voice brittle. David stood, pulling a folded document from his coat. "This is a record from an old investigation. Names, dates, shipment detail. Michael's name isn't on it, but his partner's is. The gold upstairs matches the description of what went missing." Jenny took the paper, scanning it quickly before setting it on the table as if it might burn her fingers. So what now? We just wait for someone to knock on the door with a warrant? Caroline shook her head. No. We have to be smart. Jenny's gaze locked with hers. Smart would have been telling me the truth before we tore each other apart in court. The accusation landed deep. Caroline wanted to explain, to defend herself, but the words tangled in her throat. She thought of Michael's letter, of his insistence on secrecy. She thought of the years she had spent guarding that attic, believing she was preserving something pure. Now, the gold felt like a trap. David rose. I've done what I came to do. The rest is up to you. But whatever you decide, decide fast. When he left, the kitchen felt smaller, the air heavier. Jenny stood by the table, staring at the folded document like it might shift on its own. If we keep it, we're criminal. If we give it up, we lose everything. Caroline sat slowly, the weight of the choice pressing against her chest. Either way, the life we had is gone. Jenny's voice was quiet but firm. Then the question is, do we let the gold destroy us, or do we walk away? Caroline met her daughter's eyes, hearing the unspoken truth in the question, and realizing that whichever path they chose, there would be no going back. What I thought was a betrayal was really an act of desperation to protect me. The call came late, well past the hour when Jenny would normally reach out. Caroline almost didn't answer, but the sight of her daughter's name lit something in her chest she couldn't ignore. Can I come over? Jenny's voice was softer than it had been in months. Within half an hour, they were sitting across from each other at the kitchen table. No lawyers, no files, no gold between them. Just 2 mugs of tea cooling in the dim light. I've been thinking, Jenny began, eyes fixed on her hands. About all of this, the fights, the court, the gold. I wanted to believe I was doing it for the right reasons. Caroline stayed silent, giving her space. Jenny's voice wavered. When I pushed for control, it wasn't just about money. I was scared. Scared that if I didn't hold on to something, we'd lose everything Dad worked for. That I'd lose what little I have left of him. Caroline's chest tightened. Jenny, I know how it looked, Jenny said quickly. Like greed, and maybe part of it was, but underneath that was fear. You've always been the one holding things together. I thought if I didn't take some of that power, I'd end up with nothing. The confession hit deeper than any accusation had. Caroline leaned back, her gaze softening. I wasn't trying to shut you out. I was trying to protect you from the gold, from what it really was. But I should have trusted you enough to tell you. Jenny's eyes lifted, glistening. And now we both know it's poisoned. Keeping it will just keep eating at us. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator. Finally, Caroline spoke. Then we put it aside, all of it. No more fighting over it. No more hiding it. We decide what to do together. Jenny hesitated, then nodded. And what do you think we should do? Caroline glanced toward the ceiling, as if she could see the attic through the plaster. It's not ours to keep. It never really was. I'm going to hand it over to the authorities. Jenny's brows rose, but she didn't argue. Are you sure? Yes. The word felt lighter than she expected. It's the only way to put the past behind us, to keep it from ruining whatever future we still have. The decision hung in the air, final but not crushing. Over the next few days, they began untangling the threads of the legal mess. Caroline's lawyer drafted the withdrawal notice. Jenny's attorney was informed. The case, once so vicious, started to dissolve, but the emotional scars were harder to dissolve. One afternoon, Jenny stood in the attic with Caroline, watching as the crate was lifted into the arms of 2 plainclothes officers. There were no dramatic speeches, no tears, just a quiet acknowledgement that something heavy in more ways than one was leaving their lives. Afterward, back in the kitchen, Jenny broke the silence. It's strange. I thought I'd feel like I'd lost something, but all I feel is real. Caroline reached for her hand. It's because it was never really ours to hold on to. Jenny squeezed back. Maybe now we can start over. The days that followed were different, still tentative, but warmer. They spoke more often about small things, recipes, the guard, a movie they both wanted to see. There were moments when the old tension would flicker, but it faded quicker each time. For Caroline, the absence of the gold was like a space opening in her chest, a space where trust could grow again. She no longer woke in the night at every creak in the house, no longer flinched when the phone rang. The attic was just an attic again. One evening, they sat in the living room, the fire crackling between them. Caroline thought of Michael, not of his secrets, but of his laughter, the warmth of his hand in hers on winter walks. She realized she could remember him without the weight of what he'd left behind. Jenny caught her looking and smiled faintly. "What?" Caroline shook her head. "Nothing. Just thinking." They let the silence stretch comfortable for the first time in a long while. Finally, Caroline turned to her daughter, her voice steady but edged with something new, hope. "Are you ready to move forward? It wasn't the gold that would heal us, but the time we'd spent apart, learning to trust again." The days after the gold was gone felt quieter, but not empty. It was as though the house itself exhaled, shaking off the weight of years spent guarding a secret. Caroline found herself listening more to the wind in the trees outside, to the rhythm of the kettle, even to Jenny's voice when she called. At first, the conversations were practical. Updates on legal closures, scheduling repairs to the attic hatch, but they slowly began to stretch into softer territory. Jenny would linger on the line to ask about Ruth, or the tomatoes in the garden. Caroline didn't push. She let the words find their own pace. On a cool Saturday morning, Jenny showed up with 2 cups of coffee and a box of pastries. They sat in the kitchen, sun pouring across the table, the steam from the mugs curling between them. Jenny traced the edge of her cup. "I've been thinking a lot about what I said and how I acted. I wanted to win so badly I didn't see how much I was hurting you." Caroline studied her daughter's face, the set of her jaw, the sincerity in her eyes. "I was hurt," she admitted. "But I wasn't blameless. I kept too much to myself. I let fear make my decisions for me." Jenny looked up. "Fear of what?" Caroline's answer came without hesitation. "Losing everything. Not just the gold but you. Max, the pieces of family I've been holding together since your father died." Jenny's voice softened. "I thought I was fighting for security, for something solid to build on, but maybe I was just afraid of the ground disappearing under me." They talked for a long time, about Michael, about the lean years when bills piled up faster than paychecks, about the ways they'd each learned to hold on too tightly. There were no grand declarations, just small acknowledgments that landed heavier than any courtroom verdict. It was Max who surprised them both. He stopped by that afternoon, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. "Got a minute?" he asked, glancing between them. They sat in the living room, the fire unlit, but the space warm from the sun. Max cleared his throat. "I should have stepped in sooner. I thought staying out of it would keep the peace, but it just made things worse. For you, Mom, for both of you." Caroline felt a sting behind her eyes. "You were caught in the middle." "That's not an excuse," Max said. "I saw the way things were going and I didn't say a word." "I'm sorry." Jenny gave a faint smile. "Well, at least we're all here now. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start." The next weeks were filled with deliberate effort. Jenny helped Caroline in the garden, her laughter breaking through when a particularly stubborn weed refused to budge. Caroline in turn agreed to look over some of Jenny's investment ideas, not to commit, but to understand her vision. They invited Max over for Sunday dinners again. At first the conversation skirted the heavy topics, but eventually they began speaking openly about the future. Not just about money, but about what they wanted their lives to look like, who they wanted to be to each other. One evening, over roast chicken and potatoes, Jenny said, "You know, I used to think money fixed everything. That if you had enough, you could solve any problem." Caroline smiled sadly. "And now?" Jenny hesitated, then glanced at Max before answering. "Now I think it just changes the kind of problems you have. But family, that's worth more than any gold." The words hung there and Caroline let them settle before she nodded. "It's worth protecting too." Later, as they washed dishes side by side, Jenny spoke quietly. "I don't expect us to be the way we were overnight. I know I hurt you. I know it's going to take time." Caroline met her daughter's gaze, the running water warm on her hands. "Time's something we still have." They finished the dishes in silence, but it was the comfortable kind. When Jenny pulled on her coat to leave, she lingered at the door. "I think we can rebuild," she said, her voice steady but cautious. "But it will take time." Caroline nodded slowly, feeling the truth of it settle in her chest. She was unsure, but for the first time in months, she was also hopeful. It wasn't just about repairing our bond, it was about creating something new, together. The for sale sign went up on a cool April morning, the white post standing crisp against the lawn. Caroline had mowed for nearly 3 decades. She watched from the porch as the agent hammered it into the ground, the metallic thud echoing in her chest. This house had been more than walls, it had been a vault for both memories and secrets. Letting go felt strange, but also right. Jenny pulled into the driveway, coffee in hand. "I still can't believe you're really doing it," she said, stepping up onto the porch. Caroline shrugged, but her eyes lingered on the attic window. "It's time. Too many ghosts here." They spent the day walking through rooms, deciding what to keep and what to leave. Jenny lingered in the kitchen, running her fingers over the worn countertop where so many arguments had started and ended. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked. Caroline leaned against the doorway. "Not really. I figured I'd just find somewhere smaller, quieter." Jenny hesitated, then set her coffee down. "I've been thinking about something different. What if we did something together? Something that doesn't have anything to do with Dad's money, or the gold." Caroline raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "A small business, something we build from the ground up. You're organized. I've got ideas. We could actually make a good team if we wanted to." The words hung there, tempting but heavy. Caroline thought of the courtroom, the fights, the silence. She also thought of the mornings they'd spent recently, side by side in the garden, laughing at stubborn weeds. Maybe there was something worth trying. "I don't know," Caroline said slowly. Jenny smiled faintly. "I'm not asking for an answer now. Just think about it." She did, for days, and when the realtor called with an offer that would let her walk away clean, Caroline called Jenny back and said, "All right, let's do it." The weeks that followed were a blur of planning. They decided on a small event space, a place for community gatherings, weddings and art shows. It felt fitting, building something that would bring people together after so much division. Max showed up one afternoon with a box of tools and a grin. "Figured you two could use someone who can actually lift things." He stayed for hours, helping strip old wallpaper and hauling out boxes of junk from the back room. In the evenings they sat around takeout containers, sketching floor plans, and arguing about paint colors. The arguments were different now. Lighter, without the sting of betrayal. There were setbacks. A pipe burst in the bathroom, soaking the new flooring. A shipment of chairs arrived in the wrong color. But each problem they solved seemed to stitch something back together between them. One Saturday, Caroline stood in the middle of the freshly painted main room, the late afternoon light pouring across the polished floors. Jenny was hanging fairy lights along the beams, Max balancing on a ladder to help. Caroline felt something warm and unfamiliar settle in her chest. Pride, not in the building itself, but in the way they'd built it. By June they were ready for their first event, a local photography exhibit. The night was a success. People filled the space, glasses clinked, and laughter rolled through the air. Caroline moved through the crowd, catching snippets of conversation, watching Jenny greet guests with easy charm. Max handled the music, adjusting the playlist when the room's energy shifted. Near the end of the night, Caroline stepped outside for air. The summer breeze carried the scent of blooming jasmine from the planter by the door. Jenny joined her, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "To our first win," Jenny said, raising her. Caroline clinked her glass against her daughter's, "and to many more." They stood there for a moment, watching the glow from inside spill onto the sidewalk. "This feels different," Jenny said. "How so?" Jenny's gaze was steady. "Because it's ours. Not something we inherit, not something we fought over. Something we made." Caroline's smile deepened. "That's the best kind of legacy." Jenny took a sip, her eyes glistening. "Not with tears, but with something brighter. I'm so glad we're doing this together. Caroline looked at her daughter, the night air cool against her skin, the sound of laughter drifting from inside. She felt the truth of it settle deep, warm and solid. Me too, she said, and meant it. When the past came knocking again, we had to decide, would we keep running, or finally face the truth? Business was good. The event hall's calendar was booked for months, and every week brought new faces, new laughter and a new reason to believe they'd finally turned a corner. Caroline was arranging vases along the tables for a charity luncheon when a shadow crossed the doorway. The man who stepped inside was tall, in his 60s, with a trimmed beard and the sort of expensive coat that suggested old money. His eyes scanned the room, settling on her with the weight of recognition. "Mrs. Hale?" he asked, his voice smooth but edged. "Yes, my name's Alan Royce. I was a business associate of your late husband's." The words landed like a pebble in her stomach, rippling outward. Jenny came from the back, wiping her hands on a cloth. "Is there something we can help you with?" Alan's gaze flicked between them. "I think so. I've recently come across some of Michael's old records, documents he kept outside of his usual ledgers. They concern unfinished matters." Caroline's mouth went dry. "What kind of matters?" Alan reached into his briefcase and produced a slim leather folder. Bank statements, wire transfers, notes in his handwriting, and something else, a list of assets that were never declared. "If these are what I think they are, they could change a lot about how you view your husband's finances." Jenny took a step forward, her voice careful. "Why bring them to us? Because I believe you deserve to know. And because there are others who might be interested in using this information for less noble purposes." The folder sat on the table between them, like a coiled snake. Caroline stared at it. She thought she'd buried every piece of Michael's unfinished business when the gold left the attic. "We've moved on from the past," she said. Alan smiled faintly, not unkindly. "The past has a way of moving on with you." He slid the folder closer. "What you do with it is your choice." When he left, the air felt heavier. Jenny's eyes were locked on the folder. "We should open it." "No," Caroline said, too quickly. "Mom, we've just started over. Digging through this will only drag us back." Jenny crossed her arms. "If there's something in there that affects us, our business, we need to know. Pretending it's not there won't protect us." Caroline wanted to argue, but the truth was already gnawing at her. That night, after Max closed up the hall, she sat with Jenny at the kitchen table. The folder lay between them, untouched until now. Jenny broke the seal and began to read aloud, account numbers, offshore transfers, payments to names neither of them recognized. Then came the line that stilled her voice: liquid asset reserve 12 gold bars, undisclosed. It was followed by something worse, a note in Michael's handwriting, dated just months before his death. "If everything else fails, the gold is the last safeguard, protected at all costs." Jenny looked up. "This is why he hid it." Caroline took the papers, scanning them herself. The transactions told a story, one of deals gone wrong, losses piling up, and desperate measures taken to keep the family afloat. The gold hadn't been greed, it had been survival. She pressed her hand to her forehead. "All those years, I thought I was guarding a legacy. I was guarding a lifeline." Jenny's voice softened. "Maybe he wasn't trying to keep it from me. Maybe he was just trying to make sure someone could keep us standing, if it all collapsed." Caroline swallowed hard. The anger she'd carried toward Michael for his secrets shifted into something more complicated, grief tangled with understanding. "What do we do with this?" Jenny asked. Caroline looked at her daughter. Really looked at the way she leaned forward, ready to shoulder the weight with her instead of against her. "We stop hiding from it. All of it. We lay it out, and we decide what it means for us now." Jenny nodded slowly. No more secrets," Caroline said, and felt the truth of it like fresh air in her lungs. Max appeared in the doorway, sensing the gravity in the room. "Everything okay?" Caroline turned toward him, then back to Jenny. "It will be, if we face it together." Jenny's expression softened, her eyes steady. "Then we will." Caroline reached across the table, her hand closing over her daughter's. She knew the road ahead could be messy, but it would be theirs, walked side by side, without shadows between them. "We'll face this together," she said quietly. "No matter what. The past didn't disappear, but it didn't define us anymore. Our future was in our hands." The decision wasn't made in a single night. It came slowly, over coffee-fueled mornings and quiet, fire-lit evenings, each conversation peeling away another layer of fear. By the end of the week, Caroline and Jenny knew what they had to do. On a gray Tuesday morning, they stood side by side in the small community center, facing a half-circle of neighbors, business partners, and local reporters. The air smelled faintly of coffee and damp wool. Jenny spoke first, her voice steady but not cold. "Our family's history isn't as neat as we once believed. My father, Michael Hale, was a good man in many ways, but he made mistakes, serious ones. For years, those choices were hidden. Today we're choosing transparency." Caroline's turn came next. She stepped forward, meeting the eyes of people she'd known for decades. "I kept secrets to protect my children, but in doing so, I damaged the trust between us. The gold some of you may have heard about. Yes, it existed, and yes, it was hidden. We've used it now to pay off debts, close accounts, and ensure that everything we own and operate is above board." The murmur that swept the room wasn't hostile, more a collective exhale. When the questions came, they answered them all. No evasion, no half-truth. By the time they left the center, the clouds had begun to thin, pale sunlight spilling onto the sidewalk. Jenny let out a breath she'd been holding. "That could have gone a lot worse." Caroline smiled faintly. "Or a lot better. But it's done." The following weeks were filled with tedious but necessary work. Bank meetings, contract reviews, the endless signing of documents that officially closed the last of Michael's hidden accounts. The gold, which had once sat in the attic like a curse, was transformed into clean, traceable asset. Jenny took on a new role, stepping up as the public face of the event hall. She booked clients, handled press inquiries, and even negotiated with vendors. The gleam in her eye wasn't the feverish light of ambition anymore. It was pride, tempered by the cost of what it had taken to get here. Max joined in more fully too, managing the operations side: inventory, maintenance, schedules. "Turns out I'm better with spreadsheets than drywall," he said one afternoon, earning a rare laugh from both Caroline and Jenny. They still had disagreements over budgets, over how many chairs to order for the wedding in June, but those arguments ended with solutions instead of slammed doors. One Saturday, as they were setting up for a fundraiser, Caroline caught Jenny pausing in the main hall, her gaze sweeping over the polished wood floors, the high beams strung with lights. "Proud of yourself?" Caroline asked, coming to stand beside her. Jenny's smile was slow. "Proud of this? Doesn't feel like Dad's shadow anymore. It feels like ours." Caroline looked around too. The tables set neatly, the air warm with the scent of fresh flowers. "That's because it is." The turning point came one evening in early autumn. The three of them sat on the back porch, the sun melting into gold along the horizon. They had no urgent agenda, no lingering accusations, just the hum of crickets and the clink of ice in their glasses. Jenny broke the comfortable quiet. "You know, I used to think the gold was the only thing keeping us safe. Now I think it was what kept us apart." Caroline turned that over in her mind before answering. "The real safety is knowing we can tell each other the truth, and still sit here together at the end of the day." Max raised his glass in a mock toast, to uncomfortable truths and better endings. They clinked glasses, the sound sharp and certain in the warm air. Months later, Caroline walked through the event hall before a winter wedding. Jenny was helping the florist arrange centerpieces. Max was adjusting the sound system. She paused in the doorway, watching them move with easy confidence, exchanging jokes, solving problems together. There had been a time she thought this picture was lost forever, that they'd never again be in the same room without a lawyer between them. But here they were, not just coexisting, but building something lasting. Caroline realized then that the gold had never been the real inheritance. This trust, shared purpose, the ability to weather storms together, was worth more than any metal could ever be. That night, after the guests left and the hall was quiet, Caroline lingered in the glow of the string lights. Jenny came to stand beside her, coat draped over her arm. It's strange, Jenny said softly. All that fighting over something that was never the real treasure. Caroline smiled, the warmth of the room seeping into her bones. We had to lose it to see what we really. Jenny slipped her arm through her mother's, leaning her head just slightly against her shoulder. Caroline looked around at the family she once thought she'd lost forever, and for the first time in years, she felt whole again.